Well, John Sanders had a deep commitment, passion to deliver an excellent student-athlete experience in all aspects. The next Valley Championship wasn't just something on the calendar. It was the next opportunity to create a memorable student-athlete experience. So I'm deeply grateful to the Missouri Valley Conference that they have selected Lois to be the next recipient of the John Sanders Spirit of the Valley Award. I think both John and Lois had a deep passion and commitment to that student-athlete experience, creating a lifetime of memories. The more we've talked to Lois and some of the student-athletes that participated for Lois, that's what you hear in each of the stories, is Lois's passion, her commitment to develop an opportunity for them to have an intercollegiate athletic experience. And when you think about the era and how times have changed, Lois had a hard road to make those experiences happen, but she was deeply committed, and both her and John shared that commitment.
Lois always had a passion. Anything she did, whether it was teaching or whether it be working with students in different capacities, she always had a real passion.
She was in sports and education for the right reasons. You could tell that she wanted the best for her students, and she wanted her students to become good teachers. She was the role model for how to be a teacher, the role model for how to be a student, and the role model for how to be a woman who also was into athletics, because that was new.
Of course, I was hired by the university in 1965, and Lois came in the next year, 1966. And at that time, you had to be hired at the university as a professor. You weren't hired as a coach, you were hired as an assistant professor in physical education. And at that time, of course, there was no varsity sports of any kind for women's sports. But Lois came in, and of course she had been an athlete herself growing up, so she was very interested in trying to stimulate opportunities for other young ladies.
Her personality allowed other people around her to shine and explore and do things, and she was such a great listener about what was happening. So when the women in the building at that time, the young women who wanted to play, she just took that ball and helped them run with it. And that was the type of person that she was, and I think is still today.
You know, as we all work at the University of Evansville, know that if you want to get something done, you're going to pretty well have to assume a leadership role. And Lois had a passion to make sure young ladies had an opportunity to compete. She was head coach for basketball, she was head coach for volleyball, she was head coach for tennis. She did that because somebody had to do it. And by golly, if there wasn't somebody else who could do it, she stepped up and took that responsibility.
And during those early years, you know, we just learned a lot from Lois in those initial years, and then from her allowing us to just take the leadership and go with it. And she was that type of a leader. She would not interfere, she would not try to tell you what to do. She just allowed you to develop the program.
Well, the women did not have any kind of affiliation, so everything they did was just done on campus. And any travel that they did, anything that they did basically was not supported by the university's budget. Anything they did through their own pockets.
She was trying to bring the program along as the participation was ready for it. She was very good about putting things in perspective and saying, okay, now we're ready for this, now we're ready for that. But she did acknowledge that there was an equity issue in that we had to pay for our own everything, our uniforms, our transportation, our meals. She just fought that battle on a gradual daily basis, and she basically was fighting it alone.
She was always in our corner, and she always helped with no matter what the problem was. She could figure out A, B, C solution and make it work.
Any growth we had was stimulated through the leadership of Lois Patton.
When Lois was trying to get this done, it wasn't like it is today. If you came into today's culture and society with the acceptance of women in the workforce and equity and minorities and all kinds of things in today's society, that would have been an easier mark to sell and do what she had to do. But because the culture back then, women in sports was really not an acceptable thing, period, let alone, you know, trying to get equity in it within a university. It's like when women started burning their bras, they weren't burning sports bras.
I think the real change came about when the NCAA restructured, when they went Division I, Division II, and Division III. And even though the women were not part of the NCAA until the mid-'80s, at that time, basically, that kind of also provided some direction for the women's program. Once we became Division I, the women were also looking for some type of affiliation. The first conference that I can recall that we had was called the North Star. And teams like Butler, actually Notre Dame became part of that complex as well. And Lois played a very strong role in helping us get part of that affiliation.
After Lois was just in physical education, if you would, she was always a good sounding board for ideas and to support women's, but she always wanted it in perspective. She would put sports in perspective, or athletics in perspective of life, and use sports as a teaching tool, as a life skill, if you will. The lessons that you learn in sport, how will that help you later on in life? And I think she really advocates that still today. You know, it's not about just equity in athletics for Lois. It's about how it works and how it balances out a person.
For me, as an educator and a part-time coach, which is what it was back in the day, she was the role model. She was everything. She was the guru. She was the mentor. And I think she still is. And as far as people, she still is for me.
It wasn't like she was the focal point of it. It's like what I was saying in this book, Susan Cain's book. It talks about how introverted leaders are so effective because they listen to the people around them and they allow them to take the ideas and go with it. And that's really, I think, the strength of Lois, is that she listens and she's a facilitator of a lot of ideas that allowed things to grow. I think at that point in time, that was the strength that was needed in that movement to get things done. It was not something that you could do alone.
Whenever the NCAA women became part of that structure, you saw the real growth in women's athletics. And Lois certainly was part of that leadership that led Evansville into having a program that we could be proud of for our women's athletics. She's a winner, and you choose sides, you want to pick her.